They told her she was crazy, that paying $1,000 for a rusted-out Cold War bunker was the dumbest thing she could do. But when Kara Jensen pried open that sealed hatch, what she found wasn't junk. It was a buried secret the military left behind, humming with forgotten power. And the moment she stepped inside, the story of her life and her family changed forever. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too. And if tales of mystery, legacy, and discovery keep you coming back, be sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode, it goes even deeper than this one. The listing was a joke. At least, that's what everyone said. For sale, 1,960 seconds. Era military storage site. Decommissioned. No utilities. Buyer assumes all risk. $1,000 or best offer. They laughed at it in the diner. The hardware store clerk called it a metal coffin in the woods. Even Kara's landlord offered her a free month of rent if she didn't waste her savings on it. But Kara Jensen had already made up her mind. She drove 3 hours north of town in a truck that barely held third gear, up winding dirt roads into the part of the county people stopped mapping decades ago. The address on the deed led her to a weed-choked clearing surrounded by pine. No buildings, no welcome signs, just a barbed fence barely holding onto its last few posts, and a single slab of concrete set into the hillside like a forgotten tomb. The entrance was hard to spot until the light hit it. Right then, it glinted orange like rusted teeth. A steel hatch, half buried, sealed shut with a chain that looked like it hadn't moved since the Cold War. The words, "Authorized personnel only," were barely legible beneath decades of moss and grime. Kara dropped her backpack, pulled on a pair of heavy gloves, and stared at it for a long time. This wasn't about treasure, or some conspiracy theory dream. This was about starting over, a clean slate. After the layoff, after her dad's old shop was shuttered, after the years of fixing machines for people who never remembered her name, she wanted something of her own, something no one could take back. The chain snapped easier than she expected. The lock, brittle with time, gave way after a few solid hits from the hammer. But the door? That was something else. It groaned, fought back, like it didn't want to let go of whatever was inside. It took nearly 2 hours, a crowbar, and a cracked fingernail before the hinges gave way with a screech that echoed through the hills. What waited inside wasn't a room. It was a tunnel. Steel-lined, dark, and descending at an angle steep enough to make her pause. Kara flicked on her flashlight. The beam cut through the dust, landing on a curved wall ahead. Pipes ran along the ceiling. The air smelled of rust, oil, and something sterile. She took one step in, then another. Her boots clanked against the metal grate floor. The light ahead didn't come from outside. It came from within. And with each step forward, she felt it not fear, not exactly, but the strange certainty that this place had waited for her. The air changed the farther she went in. Not colder, exactly though it was cooler underground, but thicker. Like the place had been holding its breath for decades and now was slowly exhaling. Kara moved carefully, one hand trailing the damp steel wall as she followed the tunnel's gentle curve. Her flashlight danced across old pipework, faded warning signs, and control panels that had long since gone dark. Every few steps, her boots echoed with a hollow clank, followed by silence so complete it made her ears ring. She passed a rusted-out emergency phone mounted to the wall, the kind you saw in old fallout shelters, with the cord chewed through and a faint burn mark above the receiver. Below it, stenciled into the wall in red block letters, were the words, Thundergate, Sector A. That word again. Thundergate. It was the third time she'd seen it, once on the deed paperwork, again on a crate near the entrance, and now spray-painted like a brand into the wall itself. The name made something twist in her gut. It sounded like a code, like something classified. The tunnel finally leveled out and opened into a small staging chamber. A thick steel door loomed ahead round, with a crank-style lock, like something off a submarine. Around the room, lockers lined the walls, many dented or hanging open. A few still had boots inside, dog tags, even a dusty paper coffee cup, fossilized mid-sip. Whatever this place was, someone had left in a hurry but not before living here for a while. Kara stepped up to the massive door and pressed her palm against its surface. It was freezing cold. Her flashlight beam swept the door frame, tracing welded seams, bolts the size of her fists, and a small control panel to the right. The panel had 3 lights: power, pressure, and unlock, all dark. She sighed. It figured. No way I'm opening this without juice, she muttered to herself. Her breath fogged in the air odd, since it hadn't felt that cold a moment ago. She took a step back and looked around the room again, this time more carefully. In the corner, half hidden behind a fallen metal chair, was a narrow service hatch. Unlike the rest of the bunker, the handle on this one looked newer or at least better preserved. Kara knelt, wiped away the grime, and gave it a tug. It opened with a hiss. Behind the hatch, a ladder led down into darkness. A sign above the opening read, "Auxiliary generator maint. Access only." Her heart thumped louder. This was it. If she could get power on, maybe the whole place would light up. Maybe that massive door would turn. Maybe she'd finally find out what Thundergate really was. Kara clicked her flashlight into a belt holster, took a deep breath, and started down the ladder. One rung at a time, descending into the dark, she whispered to herself, not out of fear, but out of habit, the same way her father used to mutter when working on old engines. "Come on, baby. Let's see what you're hiding." The ladder groaned under her weight, each rung slick with condensation. Kara descended slowly, one boot at a time, until her feet touched solid concrete. The air down here was colder, sharp, with the scent of machine oil, mold, and something metallic that curled at the back of her throat. She clicked her flashlight around the chamber. It was tight, more of a crawl space than a room, and packed wall to wall with machinery. Generator cores, fuel tanks, and breaker panels towered like rusted monuments. Pipes hissed faintly in the ceiling, as if still breathing after all these years. And right in the center, surrounded by bundled cables and what looked like an ancient control panel, sat a hulking, diesel-fed generator the size of a small car. Kara stepped closer. Her hand brushed the control panel, and a puff of dust rose. Every label was faded or peeled. Most of the switches were rusted in place, but the ignition toggle, that looked intact. And next to it, a handwritten note taped directly onto the panel, yellowed, curling at the edges. Scrawled in a blocky hand, "Do not restart. Without override system isn't stable." She stared at it for a long second, then whispered, "Stable enough." She moved with care, unspooling her toolkit from her side bag and laying it out in a neat row. Her hands worked quickly, memory guiding her movements like muscle memory passed down. Her dad had always said, "Engines are like people, listen close enough and they'll tell you what hurts." It didn't take long to find the issue. A corroded starter fuse. A fuel intake line gummed up with sludge. She siphoned, scraped, and cleared, fingers aching from the cold and the tight angles. At one point, she had to lie flat on her back in the dark, reaching into the belly of the machine while a line of cold water dripped from the ceiling into her ear. Still, she smiled. This was the first thing in weeks that made her feel alive. By the time she'd replaced the fuse with a makeshift bypass from an old housing bracket, she was covered in grime. She stood, cracked her knuckles, and rested her hand on the ignition toggle. "Here goes nothing," she said. She flipped the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft hum, then a click, then a roar. The generator coughed, sputtered, and then to her shock settled into a deep, steady rumble. Lights flickered to life above her, one by one, casting the room in a pale industrial glow. Kara stood back, eyes wide, as the systems around her came alive. The control panel beeped faintly. One light turned green, then another, and then, from somewhere above, faint but distinct, came the deep, mechanical clunk of a locking mechanism disengaging. She looked up toward the tunnel she'd come from. The main door. It was opening. By the time Kara climbed back up the ladder, her arms and legs were shaking not from exhaustion, but anticipation. The air had shifted again, not in temperature, but in tension. Like the entire bunker had just exhaled its first real breath in decades. When she stepped back into the staging chamber, the submarine-style door was cracked open, just a few inches. A soft light pulsed from within, a deep, amber glow like sunset caught in a jar. The sound of slowly spinning fans echoed from deeper inside, rhythmic, mechanical, alive. She approached with cautious awe. The door had groaned open under its own power. Its metal frame, once locked tight, now sat loosely in the seal. Kara placed both hands against it and pushed. The hinges resisted for only a moment before letting go. The door swung inward, and what she saw on the other side stopped her breath. It was a control center, circular in shape, 2 stories tall, and wrapped in glass panels etched with faded schematics and cryptic acronyms. Dust particles floated like snowflakes in the golden light, caught in beams from long dormant ceiling fixtures, now flickering softly to life. Consoles lined the room, each with their own blinking indicators and toggle switches. Some were labeled in English, others weren't labeled at all. The walls were covered in charts, photos, even old coffee-ringed documents still pinned where someone had left them and never returned. Kara walked in slowly, her boots leaving the first fresh tracks in a sea of dust. She ran her fingers across the nearest desk. The dust smeared beneath her touch, revealing the polished steel beneath. She picked up a pen still capped, still heavy with ink. Time had preserved this place. Like a museum, sealed in a tomb. One screen on the far end blinked with an amber light. Primary system standby, input required. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, her attention was drawn to a faded corkboard in the back corner, half shielded by a knocked-over chair. She stepped around it, heart pounding. On the board, pinned beneath a rusting paperclip, was a photograph, black and white, blurred at the edges. 3 men in military uniforms stood outside what looked like the very entrance she'd just come through. Behind them, in the photo, was the same rusted hatch, clean, pristine, newly welded, and below the photo, scrawled in marker, Thundergate, May 63. She stared at it. None of this was a simple storage site. This was something else entirely. Something secret. Something that was never meant to be found. Kara took a step back, glancing around the room, and caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of one of the dark screens. Words, barely visible, written on the far wall in what looked like soot or maybe grease. She turned. There, behind the main console, the writing stretched across the concrete. We sealed it for a reason. Kara stood frozen, her breath shallow, eyes locked on the smeared warning across the wall. We sealed it for a reason. It wasn't graffiti. It was too deliberate. The handwriting, bold, shaky, looked like it was scrawled by someone in a rush. Someone who didn't expect to walk away from wherever they'd just come. She reached out, brushed her fingers over the faded strokes. The texture felt gritty, like old grease baked onto concrete. A shiver crawled up her spine. This wasn't just an abandoned facility. This was a place someone had tried to forget. She turned away from the message and focused on the console beside it. Buttons, toggles, and switches, many covered in cracked plastic guards, surrounded a center panel, labeled OPS Access. The screws along the edge had been worn smooth from years of adjustments. Someone had tampered with this, many times. Instinct kicked in. Kara pulled a small screwdriver from her tool pouch and began removing the panel. 1 screw, 2, then 6. The plate dropped away, revealing a hidden compartment behind the console. Inside wasn't wiring. It was paper-thin, aged, and folded tightly. A map, hand-drawn, but precise. She unfolded it gently across the console. The ink was faded, but still legible. Blue pen lines sketched out the shape of the facility. The entrance hatch was marked at the top. The control room she now stood in labeled Command Deck A, but the lines extended much farther. Beyond this room, down another sealed corridor, were levels marked Lab 2, Containment, and something simply labeled Vault. The last one had a bold X next to it. Underneath the X, a single word was written in capital letters. Storage. She traced the path with her finger. The vault was deep 3 levels below where she stood, and the only path to it led through a section labeled Secured Access Corridor, which, judging by the thick red lines on the map, had been locked tight long before the bunker was ever decommissioned. A chill ran through her. Why lock off an area and then leave behind a hand-drawn map leading to it? She folded the paper carefully, slipped it into her back pocket, and moved around the command deck. One of the other control stations had a screen half-lit, blinking faintly. Log, access denied. Next to it was a keypad. Kara pressed a few keys at random. The screen flickered, then froze. She sighed. Whatever security system had once run this place was still holding on. Still, she had the map. She walked back to the center of the room, turned in a slow circle, and realized something else. The dust wasn't uniform. A trail of faint, broken footprints led from the main doorway across the room to a far wall where a metal cabinet sat slightly ajar. Kara approached, opened it wider, and found a set of military field journals. One was labeled in bold black letters, Project Thundergate. Final phase. She held it like it might crumble. Whatever this place had been, it wasn't over. Not yet. Kara sat on the cold metal floor of the command deck, the field journal resting in her lap like a loaded weapon. Every instinct told her to leave it closed, to set it down, walk back through the corridor, and never return. But she opened it anyway. The pages were thin, almost translucent, with neat, typewritten entries interspersed with frantic, handwritten notes in the margins. Each page was dated all from a tight window in 1963. The entries chronicled tests, experiments, anomalies, and growing concern. One line, scratched in red ink, caught her eye. We shouldn't have built it. The readings aren't natural. Neither are the effects. She didn't know what it referred to. Not yet. But the more she read, the more her stomach knotted. June 4th, 1963, Subject 3, showed the same displacement symptoms. Delayed reflexes, time gaps in recall, and blackouts. Vault to remain sealed until further notice. June 10th, 1963, request for DC clearance denied. Local containment measures authorized. All access rerouted through Contingency Tunnel B. Begin recorder logging tomorrow. She flipped to the final page. It was blank, save for a faint imprint like someone had pressed hard with a pen and the text had bled through. She looked around the room, suddenly more aware of the silence pressing in on her. Then her eyes fell on the far wall where a cabinet was marked, Recording Archive. The handle was stiff, but after a sharp tug, it gave. Inside were a dozen reel-to-reel audio tapes, each stored in plastic shells labeled with thick red numbers. One was already loaded onto an old player sitting beneath the cabinet. Log, number 014, final night. Kara hesitated, then reached for the power switch. The player buzzed softly, then clicked. A reel began to spin. Then voices, static at first. Then a low male voice, clipped and tense, speaking in measured tones. This is Captain R. Blake, Thundergate Command. Time, 0200 hours. Final night of lockdown procedure. We've secured Vault B. All personnel accounted for except Dr. Halden. She's still down there. She insisted on finishing the scan. There was a long pause. In the background, something hummed a deep, low vibration that made the hairs on Kara's arms rise. I don't know if anyone will hear this. Command wants a full wipe. They think this place will rust into the earth before it ever gets found. But if you're listening, if you're here, whatever you do, don't open the vault. It's not a weapon. Not really. It's... The tape sputtered. Cut off. Then silence. Kara sat motionless. The hum still echoed faintly in her ears, like it had crawled out of the tape and taken root in the bunker itself. Her heart pounded. She ejected the reel, hands shaking, and stared at it for a moment. Then her gaze shifted to the map again, and that single bold X over the vault. She had to know what was down there. The deeper Kara read into the journal, the more the pieces began to connect, not into something whole, but into something frighteningly real. The name Thundergate wasn't a code name for a base. It was the name of the project, a top-secret military initiative buried under layers of disinformation, sealed orders, and silence. It started with a test. One of the journal's earlier entries referenced a device referred to only as the core. It didn't specify what the core did, only that it had been recovered from a crash site location redacted and that it emitted a persistent, low-frequency resonance that affected both electronics and, more alarmingly, human cognition. Kara flipped to a page half-burned at the edges. Someone had tried to destroy it, but enough remained. The core appears to alter time perception in localized space. Personnel within 10 meters report hallucinations, auditory distortion, and temporal drift. Dr. Halden theorizes it may not be a power source, but a transmitter. To where, she wouldn't say. There were sketches rushed, hand-drawn of a circular room labeled Vault B. Inside it, a pod-shaped object sat suspended in a cradle of hydraulic arms. Around it, what looked like conduits or antennae jutted from the floor. The more she studied the diagram, the more her heart raced. That wasn't a bomb. It was a machine, and from the way they'd locked it away, it might have been alive. Kara set the journal down and walked back toward the control room's central console, brushing dust off the keys. She tapped a few, trying again to access any logs that could give her more. Still locked. But then, she noticed something she'd missed before. Under the console, tucked into a slot behind a hinged panel, was a laminated card, an old security badge. Faded, but legible. The photo was of a woman with dark hair tied back, eyes serious behind thick glasses. The name printed beneath, Dr. Marla Halden, Chief Research Officer. Kara slid the badge through the reader. A beep, then a pause. Then the screen blinked to life. Access granted. Level 2 clearance. Archive summary enabled. Lines of text appeared. She scrolled through quickly, her eyes scanning for what mattered. Dozens of system logs, reports, and one file flagged with a red header. Project Thundergate. Mission suspended. Classified. She opened it. A grainy photo loaded first. The same pod from the sketch, surrounded by men in hazmat suits. The log beneath it read, the 12th of June, 1963. Project Thundergate suspended indefinitely after uncontained event during test phase. Subject inside Vault B initiated unauthorized power cycle. Facility experienced simultaneous loss of signal and mechanical failure. 1 casualty confirmed. 1 presumed MIA. Orders issued. Seal site. Terminate project. No further study authorized. Kara sat back. The air around her suddenly still. Someone had died down there, and someone else had vanished, never found, never recovered. The vault hadn't just been sealed for safety. It had been sealed for mercy. But now, it was her call, and no matter what the logs said, no matter what had happened in 1963, she had to know the truth. She had to see the vault for herself. The secured corridor stretched out before her, like a throat lined with steel, narrow and silent. Kara stood at the threshold, the control room now dim behind her, its flickering lights casting shadows that danced along the curved tunnel walls. The map in her back pocket had shown the way past the command deck, down through the access corridor labeled C2, and into the vault wing. But between here and there were 3 blast doors, and each of them was locked. She returned to the generator room, climbed back down into the belly of the bunker. Her boots rang out over the metal ladder, and as she landed on the concrete floor, The smell of diesel and machine oil hit her again, sharp and bitter. The generator hummed softly. Still alive. Still working. She walked to the secondary control panel mounted to the wall beside the main engine. It was older than the others, with analog dials and toggle switches, each labeled in fading paint. One corner bore a yellowed sticker. Emergency override site access. She reached for the switch, but it was locked behind a heavy brass cover, bolted tight. Kara exhaled sharply. Figures. Digging through her side pouch, she found her rusted ratchet and socket set. It took 20 minutes to get the bolts off, some stripped, some fused from decades of moisture. Her knuckles split open on the last one, blood smearing the metal. She wiped it on her pants, gritting her teeth. Finally, the panel lifted open. She stared at the switch inside. It was labeled Aux Grid, Unlock, Engage Blast Doors. There was no warning label. No red tape. Just a piece of paper taped above it, handwritten, in all caps. If the door's open, make sure you want what's on the other side. She hesitated only a second, then flipped the switch. Above her, in the corridors of Thundergate, the silence shattered. Clang. Whir. Chunk. She scrambled back up the ladder. By the time she reached the command deck, the bunker was alive. Lights had shifted brighter now, more directional. Emergency floods mounted in the hallway strobed for a moment, then stabilized to a soft white glow. Kara stepped back into the corridor and moved toward the first blast door. It was open, fully retracted into the wall, revealing a dark, reinforced tunnel ahead slick with condensation and lined with thick cables and brackets. The second door was still closed, its panel now glowing with an amber light. She touched the screen. Identification required. She held up the badge from Dr. Halden. A chime. The door hissed, then pulled back. Another tunnel, and then the third door. This one bore a warning stenciled in red across its frame. Restricted Zone. Vault B. Project Thundergate. Kara's hands were shaking as she lifted the badge one more time. The door trembled, then opened. A rush of air escaped, dry and cold, like a long-held breath finally released. She stepped forward. Whatever was waiting inside was still here, and still humming. The vault was vast, larger than any other room in the bunker, and colder too. Kara stepped carefully into the darkness, her boots echoing across the polished concrete floor. The overhead lights had flickered to life as the door opened, but they cast only a pale circle around the entrance. The rest of the space remained cloaked in shadow, until the hum deepened. It started low, a sound she felt more than heard vibrating in her bones, in the space behind her eyes. It wasn't threatening. It felt curious, like something dormant stirring at the edge of awareness. Then the center of the room lit up. Rows of recessed lights came to life one by one, illuminating a massive oval-shaped structure suspended in the middle of the chamber. It wasn't a missile. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't anything she'd ever seen before. The object hovered inside a circular gantry, supported by 3 mechanical arms bolted into the floor. Its surface was seamless and metallic, more matte than chrome, with soft curves instead of sharp edges. It looked elegant, intentional, like something made with care, not malice. A series of cables ran from its base into the floor, and above it, what looked like sensor pods or antennae floated silently, unmoving in the recycled air. Every so often, the object gave off a faint glow, blue at first, then fading into purple, like a breathing rhythm. Kara walked closer, her eyes locked on it, heart pounding. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, shaped almost like a capsule or a pod, but with no visible seams, no doors, no hatches. Then she saw it, on the floor, just beneath the gantry, coated in a fine layer of dust, and almost hidden beneath a coil of wire, a small metal plaque. She knelt and wiped it clean. Thundergate Prototype Core, Sovereign Class, Property of United States Air Force, Experimental Technologies Division, do not activate without executive clearance. She stared at the words, Prototype, Sovereign, do not activate. This wasn't just military hardware. It was a technological anomaly, a test of something beyond missiles or machines. And now it sat here, untouched for over half a century, and still running, still aware. The field journal had called it a transmitter. Others had thought it was a weapon. But this didn't feel like a bomb. It didn't radiate dread. It felt like it was waiting. She walked around the gantry slowly, watching the way the light played off the surface of the object. As she circled around the back, she saw something that made her stop cold. A small panel, different from the rest, bolted onto the wall. Not military. A nameplate screwed into the center read, "Property of Jensen Systems. Pat. Pending." Her last name. Her father's company. The one that went bankrupt 10 years after he vanished. She stumbled backward, breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a relic of the Cold War. This was personal. Whatever Thundergate was, her father had built part of it. Kara couldn't move. The sound of her own breath echoed louder than the hum of the core behind her. The nameplate was unmistakable. The same beveled metal tags her father used to affix to all his custom builds when she was a kid. She used to joke that he treated machines better than people, but he'd only smile and say, "A good machine remembers who made it." And now, here it was, buried in a bunker no one was supposed to find. She reached out and brushed the edge of the plate with her fingertips. Dust smeared away, revealing the full inscription. Jensen Systems. M. Jensen. Series 3 core shell. Spec unit. Thugzao. X1. Her father's initials. M. Jensen. Kara's head spun. Her dad wasn't a military contractor, at least, not that she ever knew. He was a small-time inventor, tinkerer, the kind of guy who made more prototypes than paychecks. He vanished when she was 9. No note, no body, just a truck found abandoned at a gas station off Highway 17. Everyone assumed the worst, but she remembered the late nights, the sealed garage, the strange copper rings he machined for clients she never met, the smell of ozone and engine oil. She'd once asked what he was building in there. He said, "Something that might outlast me." Kara swallowed hard. He hadn't disappeared. He'd been erased. She turned her attention back to the machine. From this angle, she noticed a second panel on its base, smaller, shielded under a retractable cover. It had no labels, only a keyhole. Kara knelt, heart pounding, and tried her shop keyring out of habit. Nothing fit. But then she remembered. The cigar box. Back in the truck, in the glove compartment, she had kept one of her dad's old keepsakes, a worn silver key with no matching lock. She'd always assumed it went to one of his old tool chests. She bolted out of the vault, feet echoing wildly as she sprinted down the hallway. 10 minutes later, she returned, breathless, clutching the key. Her hands shook as she knelt by the panel and slid it in. It clicked. The cover popped open. Inside was a small glass capsule no wider than her thumb, and a switch beneath it labeled Core Sync Initiation. Next to the switch, scribbled on the panel edge in grease pencil, were 5 familiar words. "If you find this, Kara." Her throat closed. This wasn't an accident. He left this for her. Not the military. Not a technician. Her. She stared at the switch, the hum of the machine vibrating up through her knees as she knelt beside it. The air felt warmer now, charged. The lights above the core flickered softly, then stabilized. He hadn't just helped build the machine. He had hidden a message inside it. Possibly himself. Kara whispered into the empty vault. "What did you do, Dad?" And more importantly, why had they buried him, and this so far beneath the world? The moment Kara flipped the core sync initiation switch, the bunker shifted. Not violently, no alarms, no flashing lights, but subtly. The ambient hum deepened into a richer tone, almost melodic, like the drone of a tuning fork too low to hear but impossible not to feel. It resonated in the walls, in her chest, above the pod. Those antenna-like sensors began to move, rotating slowly in unison. Lines of dim blue light traced across the floor, forming a circle around the gantry cradle, not painted, but projected. like some kind of active field grid. Kara stumbled back, breath quickening. The pod's surface changed. Its matte exterior shimmered faintly, as if the very metal was reconfiguring. Then, just above the nameplate, a seam appeared seamless before, now glowing gently. It expanded horizontally, revealing a small compartment about the size of a laptop. Inside, a circuit board, sleek, advanced, unlike anything she'd ever seen, and embedded at the center of it was a glowing drive module, not a standard military data core. No serial number, no encryption port, but etched across its top in hand-scratched lettering was a single word. Remember. Kara reached in and lifted it carefully. It was warm, not hot, and light enough to feel delicate, yet heavy enough to feel important, like it had weight beyond metal and wire. She turned it over in her hands. It had a micro-access port, shielded beneath a worn plastic tab. Something clicked in her memory. Her dad used to build prototype drives like this for fun, he said. The military's hardware was always a generation behind. She'd seen him load one into a reader once. He called them echo drives, because they didn't just store data, they stored conscious threads, fragments of thought, voice, memory. The concept had never made it past beta, at least not officially. Kara stood, heart pounding, and walked over to a nearby control panel mounted against the vault wall. It was inert, but had a matching input port. She slid the drive in. Nothing, then a flicker. The screen blinked. Then slowly, pixel by pixel, an interface loaded. No passwords, no firewalls. Just a black screen with one blinking prompt. Is greater than playback. Initiate. M. Jensen. She stared at it, then tapped the key. The screen went dark. A second passed. Then her father's voice filled the chamber. Kara, if you're hearing this, then somehow you found the vault. You found me. She stumbled backward, hand clamped over her mouth. I tried to leave something behind, something the world wouldn't erase. Thundergate wasn't about weapons, it was about understanding. The core, it's not ours. It was never ours. The audio cracked, faded, then came back. I couldn't tell you before I left. They were already watching. But I left a map inside the sync logs. If you follow it, you'll know the truth. They buried Thundergate because they were afraid of what it might become. But if anyone could finish what I started, it was you. You always listened better than I ever did. I love you, kid. And just like that, the voice faded. The vault fell silent again, except now, it knew her name. The silence, after her father's voice faded, was almost unbearable, like the whole bunker was holding its breath again. Kara stood frozen, eyes locked on the flickering screen, heart thundering in her chest. He was gone, but his words were still alive, still echoing in this place. She whispered to herself, I found you, but there was more. The message had hinted at a map, something inside the sync logs. And Thundergate wasn't just a secret. It was a secret someone had tried to expose. She returned to the terminal. New options had appeared. Sync archive, engineering logs, and one that pulsed slightly brighter than the others. Personal comm. She clicked it. A single document loaded. To M. Jensen. From Dr. M. Halden Confidential. Subject: Thundergate Oversight. Kara opened it. Martin, they're not listening. I've sent 3 escalation requests to command. Each one gets buried, or I'm told to focus on hardware performance, not implications. But you and I both know that's not enough anymore. Since the last core test, 2 of our engineers have had blackouts. One wrote coordinates in chalk on the command deck floor when asked. He didn't remember doing it. The core isn't just emitting frequency, it's projecting something. And not just data, intent. I've reviewed your shielding mod, and I think it's the only reason you haven't been affected like the others. But it's not enough. They're planning a full power-up cycle next week. They want a broadcast. They think it'll give them control. They're wrong. It's not about control. It's about contact. I'm sending this to you off-grid, through the maintenance uplink. I've attached my own logs, every file I could hide. If they find out, I'll be removed. Maybe worse. But someone has to know. Someone has to finish this properly. If you make it out, hide it. All of it. And if Kara ever finds it, tell her I'm sorry we couldn't stop them in time. Marla. Kara's hands were shaking by the time she finished reading. Dr. Halden had known. She'd tried to stop it. And she'd spoken her name decades before Kara had even set foot in this bunker. They'd both tried to stop something bigger than either of them had ever imagined. And now Kara was holding it in her hands. She opened the file attachment at the bottom of the letter. Dozens of compressed logs loaded onto the screen, thermal scans, core data, audio clips, footage from the last sync event. But one file was different. Shorter. Text only. It was titled, "The Vault Will Not Stay Closed." Her skin prickled. She knew what had to happen next. The town. The world. Someone had to know. She backed up the entire folder onto a portable drive from her kit. It blinked red, copying then green. She had what she needed. But the moment she removed the drive, the screen flashed a new warning. Remote access detected, trace in progress. Someone else was watching. And now, they knew she was here. Kara didn't sleep that night. She barely blinked. After copying the logs, she stashed the drive in the lining of her jacket and shut everything down, power to the core. Lights in the vault. Access terminals. She wasn't sure it would stop them from tracking her, but instinct told her the less this place lit up, the longer she'd have before someone followed the signal. But in her gut, she knew it was already too late. By morning, the first drone appeared. It came silently, a dark dot above the tree line that hovered just long enough to make sure she saw it, then vanished behind the canopy. No markings, no sound of rotors, just presence. She packed what she could. Journals, photos, her dad's drive, the field logs. She couldn't carry everything, but she took what mattered. Then she locked the hatch behind her, looping the chain 3 times and welding it shut with the portable torch she'd brought, just in case. It was the first time she'd used it. 3 hours later, the men came. They didn't arrive in black SUVs. There were no helicopters or sirens, just a single unmarked van with tinted windows and 2 men in gray windbreakers. They knocked on the door of her small house, just outside of town, like vacuum salesmen, polite, calm, and utterly unreadable. She answered with a wrench in one hand and her phone recording in the other. The taller one smiled. "Miss Jensen?" She didn't respond. "We're with the Department of Strategic Facilities Oversight. We're looking into a matter of federal interest involving a decommissioned installation in the Pine Creek district. We understand you may have recently acquired a structure that falls within restricted parameters. Is that so?" she said flatly. He nodded. "We'd like to take a look, just to make sure everything is up to code." She didn't move. The other man, shorter, darker eyes, stepped forward. Too close. "Miss Jensen, I'd advise you to cooperate. That installation was not meant for civilian use." "And yet," Kara replied, "I bought it fair and square. County deed office has the records. Public auction. Legal acquisition." Neither man flinched. "We can get a warrant." "I'm sure you can," she said. "But until you do, this conversation's over." Hens. She closed the door and locked it. Behind it, her legs were shaking. They didn't try to break in. They didn't return that night. But the next morning, she found her mailbox pried open, her truck's gas tank drained, and a business card slid under her front door. "We'll be in touch." No name, no number. Just an embossed seal, an eagle holding a lightning bolt in its talons, surrounded by stars. She realized then, they didn't want to take the core back. They wanted to silence the story. But Kara had already decided. She'd lived her life fixing other people's messes, quietly, in the background. Not this time. If they were going to erase her, they'd have to do it in front of everybody. By the end of the week, the town knew something was up. Kara didn't hide it, not anymore. She'd lived in the shadows of other people's secrets her entire life. Her father's disappearance. The whispers around the bunker. The polite smiles from townsfolk who thought she'd gone off the rails. But now, Curiosity was turning to concern, and concern was turning into attention. So she gave them what they wanted. She made it public. She sent out a message, not to the press, but to the people. A simple post on the town's old community board, the same place people listed yard sales and lost pets. It read, "Come to the Pine Creek Bunker Saturday at 3 p.m. I'm going to show you what they tried to bury. Bring your own eyes and someone with a camera." That was all. She half expected no one to come, but at 2:30, the cars started lining the gravel road. By 3, 24 people stood at the tree line, watching as Kara welded off the last of the hatch's chains and pulled the heavy steel door open once more. The sun spilled across the threshold, casting golden light down into the darkness she now knew by heart. Kara turned and faced them, neighbors, skeptics, and a handful of people she'd never seen before, holding tripods and shoulder cameras. "I didn't find gold," she said. "I didn't find weapons or treasure. I found a secret, one that belonged to my father, and one that belongs to all of us now." Then she led them inside, down the corridor, past the command deck, past the warning signs and sealed doors, now unlocked. Every light she passed flicked on, like the place recognized her, now like it had accepted her as its steward. When they reached the vault, the crowd gasped. The core pulsed, gently, in the center of the room, quiet, glowing no longer ominous, but strangely serene. The gantry's arms held it steady like reverence, not restraint. "This," she said, "is Thundergate." She turned to the cameras. "My father helped build this. Not to destroy, to understand. It's not a weapon, it's a message. And I think it's been waiting for someone to finish it." She reached for the switch, the one labeled Core Sync Initiation. And this time, she didn't hesitate. The lights shifted. A low vibration filled the room, not a sound, but a feeling in their bones. The core lifted, just inches, hovering freely in its cradle. A halo of projected light formed around it, maps, constellations, symbols no one recognized. The cameras kept rolling. Someone in the back whispered, "Holy hell." No one moved. Not even when the door behind them reopened and the 2 men from the windbreaker van stepped inside. They didn't try to stop her. They didn't say a word, because now it was too late. The world had seen it. The story was no longer a secret. The demonstration went viral in less than 24 hours. It wasn't just the footage of the core levitating or the strange glyphs orbiting the pod like a silent language. It was Kara's voice. Steady, defiant, real. People didn't just see a mysterious machine. They saw a daughter honoring her father's truth in the face of silence. Within days, journalists camped at the edge of the property. Military spokespeople declined to comment. Online sleuths dissected every frame of the video. Engineers speculated. Conspiracy theorists spiraled. But through it all, Kara stayed quiet, not because she was afraid, because she wasn't finished. 3 days after the demo, she returned to the vault alone. The crowd was gone. So were the men in windbreakers. But the bunker felt more alive than ever. The hum of the core wasn't just sound now. It was company. She stepped toward the pod, slow and steady. The gantry had lowered it after the demonstration. The glow had dimmed to a soft, steady pulse. Waiting. She walked to the small control panel she'd opened before, the compartment that had revealed her father's key, the slot that had delivered his voice. She reached into the side cavity again, not expecting much, and found something new, a second capsule. Smaller than the first. It hadn't been there before. She was sure of it. She pulled it out. It was a recording drive, but not one of the standard military types. She recognized the casing. Her father had custom machined it. This wasn't storage for logs or systems. This was personal. A name etched across the top in faint, hand-carved lettering. Kara. Final. She blinked back the sting in her eyes and slid the capsule into the nearby terminal. The screen flickered, then loaded a single message. "Hey kiddo." Her father's face appeared grainy, worn, but unmistakable. eyes just like hers, a tired, grease-smudged grin. If you found this, then I guess I did okay. I didn't get to see the end, but you did. You always saw things clearer than I did. Anyway, Thundergate. It wasn't about control. It was about contact. I thought I could use it to find something out there, something bigger. I was wrong. He leaned closer to the lens. What I found wasn't out there. It was you. It was always you. The legacy isn't in the machine. It's in who gets to carry it forward. And Kara, if you're watching this, I know you already are. You finished what I couldn't. The screen faded to black. Then one more message appeared in text, beneath the vault floor. Panel 7. Kara spun around, counting the floor tiles. They were large, numbered faintly in the corners. She knelt at number 7, pried the corner up with her multi-tool. Beneath it, a hollow. Inside, a black journal, wrapped in plastic, and a box. She opened it. Inside lay a simple, silver pendant. Her mother's. She hadn't seen it since the day her father disappeared. Underneath the pendant, in her father's handwriting, was one final note. You were never alone. You were always the light. The pendant hung heavy around her neck, not in weight, but in meaning. Kara stood at the center of the vault, the walls humming with memory, and clutched the small silver shape against her chest. The same one her mother used to wear, the one she thought had vanished when her father did. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was proof. Proof that he'd never left her behind, not really. He'd been preparing this place for her, piece by piece, knowing one day she'd be the one to finish what he started. Now she had. But she wasn't going to keep it hidden. Within a month, Kara turned the Pine Creek bunker into something no one could have predicted. She didn't sell it, didn't lock it down. She opened it. With help from a handful of volunteers, mechanics, electricians, and retired engineers from nearby towns, she rewired the safety systems, reinforced the access tunnels, and restored power to the entire facility. She set up digital archives of the Thundergate files, redacted just enough to keep people safe, but left the truth intact. And most importantly, she turned the vault into a space of discovery, not destruction. No military guards, no politicians with photo ops. Just people, scientists, students, skeptics, believers coming from around the country to see it, to stand where secrecy had once lived and learn instead of fear. By spring, universities began requesting access. By summer, a global research collective had offered funding not to take the core, but to study it on her terms. And the pendant never left her neck. Kara never stood on a stage or gave TED Talks. She didn't want attention. She wanted direction. So she started a foundation under her father's name, the Jensen Initiative, aimed at uncovering buried technologies left behind or erased by time. Technologies meant to heal, not harm. Thundergate became a symbol of second chances, of stories rewritten, of legacies passed from father to daughter, and from secrecy to stewardship. She still visited the vault alone sometimes. At night, when the crowd had gone, she'd sit cross-legged in the corner, notebook in her lap, watching the pulse of the core. Soft, steady, like a heartbeat. One night, Leo, the teenage welder who helped her rewire the hatch, asked her why she didn't just shut the place down. Let it rest. Kara had smiled, quietly, sadly. Because I think it woke up when I walked in, she said. And I don't think it wants to go back to sleep. He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't. Years later, long after Thundergate had become a staple in documentaries and textbooks, someone asked Kara what she'd found down there. She said, "Not what. Who? I found a father who never gave up, a town that came back to life, a future hidden in a vault, and the strength to stop hiding." And when they asked what she'd do if someone ever tried to take it away again, she smiled. They can try. But now the world's watching.